Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. Now, this is grave news, and that's not why I'm wearing a tie. Unusual for me, I know, but that's for an unrelated reason. Anyway, so for the first time since 1962, Russian nuclear armed forces are on special alert. So it's a very frightening moment. First time in 60 years they've done this. So Putin, as usual, is trying to intimidate people, trying to hold the world to ransom, saying there's a chance that he might start a nuclear war. Obviously, that would be the end of all human life if he did so. So it is a grossly irresponsible and outrageous thing to do, to threaten to annihilate our species. And indeed, almost all forms of life would die as a result of that. And why? Unfriendly acts by NATO. Well, NATO is supporting a democratic country which has been subjected to an illegal and unprovoked invasion by Russia. So against the will of the international community, though it's true that Russia was able to block a UN Security Council denouncing this invasion. So it's worrying. I mean, I don't think that he's going to start a nuclear war. That would be moronic. Even he's not that stupid, and even he's not that insane, because you don't win that, you just all get wiped out. There's been mutually assured destruction. So Russia is reviled around the world in a way that it never was before, and of course there are plenty of good Russians, so it's a pity. So there have been anti-war protests all across the world, in Spain, in Azerbaijan, a country which had a complicated but fairly cordial relationship with Russia. In the Netherlands, in the United Kingdom, just across from Downing Street, people who were Ukrainian, some of whom were Russian, protesting against the war, some of whom were British, other nationalities, in France, and really you name it. So display of Ukrainian flags at all sorts of events, Saturday Night Live in the United States, that show they had some Ukrainian choir singing their national anthem. So great solidarity. So I think Putin has really miscalculated. The pushback has been greater than he anticipated. I mean, he knew there were going to be some sort of sanctions. They've been, most Russian banks have been cut off from SWIFT. Their moves to stop the Russian central bank being able to support the ruble, because of course the ruble is sliding even more, has lost almost 20% of its value the last few days. Now, obviously that makes their exports cheaper, but their exports aren't always denominated in dollars. I don't think there's going to be a lot of tourism to Russia for a while. Most of their airlines are going to go bust because they can't fly to most European Union countries, the UK, United States, Canada, or they can't land there. Oh, Won Jin, what my good friend from Korea, we met in China, will direct message me, we'll get back in contact. Yeah, it is deeply troubling. So they will lose most of their business, these airlines, because yeah, they can fly to Africa, some Asian countries, but something like 40% of their revenue is from flying to those Western countries, and you just can't do without that. Indeed, various Western airlines, they'll also be hit, but landing in Russia is not a big part of their business. Having to go around Russian airspace, that is more of a headache, but they can cope with that more easily. The fighting rages on. So it's difficult to know what the real casualty figures are. The other day that the Ukrainians were claiming they'd killed 450 Russian military personnel in the conflict so far. I don't know how true that is. Remember William Howard Russell, that Irishman who was the father of war correspondence, and he said the first casualty of war is truth. Ironically enough, he cut his teeth in the Crimean War of 1853 to 56. I remember about 2014, I call it the Second Crimean War, but it's spread to the whole of Ukraine. So I'm following Vladimir Putin on Instagram, and he's now referring to the Kiev authorities, the Kiev power and so on, as in that's the Ukrainian government. So he's trying to delegitimize it, calling it the regime, as though it's not a proper government. If anything, he is a regime. It's his merry mob who've been terrorizing their own people for decades. So where is Zelensky? He hasn't showed his face for a while. He did meet representatives of Belarus recently. He's not going to meet in Belarus. I mean, he could be kidnapped, given to the Russians, because that country is little more than an adjunct of Russia. He doesn't trust them. They've obviously expedited this invasion, though Belarusian forces haven't actually taken part. You support Ukraine against Russia invasion. This is partly the fault of powerful figures in the West. Well, I mean, how is it the fault of powerful figures? I'm not saying you're wrong, as in they didn't do enough. NATO didn't do the one thing guaranteed to stop this, and that's to actually dispatch troops to block the Russians from invading in the first instance. But the trouble is, that could lead to a nuclear war and the end of humanity. So even the conquest of the whole of Ukraine, horrendous that would be, would not be as bad as a war that wipes out our species. So already tens of thousands of Ukrainians have fled and they're massing at the borders to go into other countries. But why is Putin doing this? Why is he saber-rattling over nuclear weapons? A bit like Nixon's madman theory, to keep us guessing. Will he? We just can't take the risk that he's going to do that, so we have to back down. It was very heartening to see that that Germany is giving 1,000 Stinger missile systems to Ukraine, because obviously Germany's invaded Ukraine and Russia before. There's this always idea that if they ever try to be a little bit assertive, you need to speak up for freedom and justice, say, let's not forget what you did in the 1940s. Just because Germany was terribly in the wrong in the past doesn't prove they're in the wrong now. They're in the right now. It's partly the EU and NATO pushing into Ukraine. Well, we're not pushing into Ukraine. Ukraine was eager to join them. Another thing's often overlooked. In 2014, where there were discussions about that Russian Black Sea fleet, their base, Sebastopol in Crimea, because the lease on that was due to expire in 2017. Could it be expanded or not? Sorry, extended or not? Now, NATO said you can have the Russian Black Sea fleet in your country, or you can join NATO. You cannot do both. So which is it to be? So Russia was worried that they're going to lose their port there. So that's one of the reasons they want to make sure that Yanukovych stayed. Actually, he got overthrown, but he had signed an extension of the lease. And even though then Russia then invaded and seized the Crimean Peninsula, having said that, to try and mollify Moscow, Ukraine didn't say, and when we get Crimea back, your fleet has to leave, actually. Because they are bent over backwards to be accommodating. So that's it. I mean, I suspect the war's not going terribly well for Russia. Not saying Russia's losing it. And yes, they would win. It's just a question of how long and how painful, how costly it's going to be in blood and in gold. So a bit worse than they anticipated, I expect. I think one of our template's got to be the Georgian War of 2008. 1st of August 2008, during the Beijing Olympics, when Russia invaded Georgia, and they control about 30% of Georgia's territory. It's, after Cyprus, the most occupied country in the world, as in the largest percentage of its landmass is occupied by a foreign power. I think they will do something along the lines of that. Obviously, Georgia is much smaller in territory and in population, far less important to Russia. So Crimea, to even see something like 30% of, not Crimea, of Ukraine, to see something like 30% of Ukraine would take much longer. But I don't think they want to keep as much as 30% of it. They already had about 10% before this latest invasion, perhaps snatch another 10%. They might try and overrun most of the country, certainly Kiev, and then pull back after a month or so, but we'll see. I think it's like a raid. As they say, teach the Ukrainians a lesson. Let that be a salutary warning to anyone who's a neighbour of Russia, that if you irk us, if you do not bow down, if you do not knuckle under, you will get a hiding. We will kill thousands of your people. And so the rule by fear, bolster Putin's popularity at home, not really working, with some quite courageous anti-war protesters, obviously going to hit the economy. With Ukraine against Russia at the end of the day, but yes, they're powerful figures. Yeah, there's some people in the European Union who want to expand, and some people in Ukraine who wanted to expand. I mean, I am a European Union citizen. I don't think Ukraine should be allowed in to the European Union, even if there was no Russian occupation, not for a long time. It would have to really sort out corruption, would have to become much more prosperous. I think the European Union overexpanded. I wouldn't have even allowed countries in 2004. The Czech Republic, by now, sure would have allowed it in. Romania should not have been allowed in 2007. By now, would have allowed it in, maybe. Anyway, so it's true that did raise tensions, but Russia has absolutely no right to veto the future of Ukraine. And that's why before this conflict, Putin was disregarding the Ukrainian government, treating it as impertinent, as though it was no rightful government, the country is not a legitimate country, and these outrageously moronic, offensive, and illogical and historical things. Putin could find himself paying a very high blood price indeed if the Ukrainians are well armed with those Javelin anti-tank man-portable weapons. But we shall see. I'm surprised there hasn't been more of them, or if NATO supply the Ukrainians with medium-range missiles to rain down on Moscow, just the way that these death-dealing weapons have been raining down in Kiev. But they don't want to push Putin too far. Would he do something really crazy? And he's only committed perhaps half his forces so far. So they're slowly does it. They're huge believers in artillery, to have that in place and then demolish the city if special forces can't take it, if it doesn't surrender, something like that. So I think this is early days. I think the conflict has got rather longer to go. If you could get Zelensky to give in to his terms now, I don't think so. But the Ukrainians, if they can just keep resistance going after a month or maybe a few more weeks, the Russians, I suppose, pull out of certainly most of Ukraine, feeling that they've really wrecked Ukraine. This is some kind of victory. Even if the Ukrainians don't say, no, we're promising not to join NATO, will NATO let them join after that? Probably not. It would take several years to rebuild Ukraine after the damage has been wrought. But is it worth for Russia? It's cost them hundreds of billions of dollars already in terms of stock market losses, the ruble crashing, various businesses are going to go bust because of SWIFT. They won't be able to sell their oil and gas so easily. It's Russian unacceptance of Ukraine's right to join the EU and NATO. That's the problem, not Ukraine pursuing its own foreign policy and defense policies it's absolutely entitled to do. Kiev didn't dictate to Moscow, no, you can't have the Collective Security Treaty Organization, no, you can't have the Eurasian Economic Union. Right, thank you very much for praising my tie. All right, I'm signing off now. One Jin, direct message me. Toodaloo.